Hello and welcome to our discussion of the Iliad by Homer. Today we will be discussing chapter 7, or the duel between Hector and Ajax. I'm calling them chapters, but you may hear them called books. Same difference, essentially. And what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a recap of what happened from books 1 through 6. So if you're just joining us today and you're curious about chapter 7 for whatever reason, great. Or you can go back to the beginning of our series and watch the whole thing and follow along with the book. You can also get my translation, which is meant for first-time modern readers. And that is my translation of Homer's The Iliad. My goal with this book was to make it so that anybody who speaks and reads English can pick this book up and understand the Iliad, the actual Iliad. This is a real line-by-line translation of Homer's The Iliad, but I've made some slight alterations. I have little guidelines to help you along the way in understanding what's going on. Plus, it is in a simple to read, but also enjoyable iambic pentameter. In other words, a kind of verse. So it is in verse. So anyway, check this out. You can go to troubadour.studio/Iliad, and you can get chapter 1 for free to kind of see if you'd like to read more, and then you could buy it at that website. But what I like to do is I like to give the recap for chapters 1 through 6. Then I'm going to discuss each of the sections. So in my book, I broke it down, which is not always the case, into these various sections. Each section kind of explains what's about to happen, which will help you when you're reading this ancient text. And so we'll go through each of the sections. I'll give you a word of the day as we go through, and then we'll have a little recap at the end. And I will do some readings of little excerpts from my translation, so to help you understand this book more. I want to bring alive this story. Okay, so chapter 7 is the duel between Hector and Ajax. From chapter 1 through 6, essentially what we have happening is at the beginning of the book 1, chapter 1, we had a pause in the war between the Greeks and the Trojans. But within the Greek camp, we have Achilles and Agamemnon, these two leaders, fighting. And Achilles, the greatest of all the Greek warriors, says, "I'm done." He quits and he's going to sail home. So after this, the fighting is about to resume between the Greeks and the Trojans. But before it starts, they try this single combat warrior duel. And that is at first between Paris and Menelaus. Paris, who had abducted Helen from Menelaus and essentially kickstarted this whole fight that has been going on, raging in Troy for 10 years, starts losing this duel but is whisked away by his goddess patron Aphrodite, the goddess of love. So after that, the truce between the momentary truce, the ceasefire, so to speak, between the Trojans and the Greeks is stopped, and the fighting resumes, and it is brutal. It is absolutely brutal. And Diomedes, a Greek warrior, is given an aristeia. That's one of our Greek words of the day previously, where it's his best moment. It's when he goes into almost like a god mode and starts demolishing the Trojans. Hector retreats back into Troy to beg the gods to help support him. That's book 6, it's chapter 6. Then we're leading into chapter 7 when Hector and Paris return to the battlefield. And then we get the duel between Hector and Ajax. So here are the sections in chapter 7. 1, Hector and Paris join the battle. Athena and Apollo intervene. Hector issues a duel to the Greeks. Ajax draws the lot. The duel begins. The duel ends in truce. A night of mourning and respect. The Greeks build defenses. So let's go through this one section at a time. So chapter 6, Hector and Paris leave Troy, the walls of Troy, where Hector in particular has been asking the Trojan women to pay homage to the gods, particularly Athena, really specifically to stop Diomedes, who's on this rampage. So he's clearly getting help from Athena. And so they want him to stop. They want it to stop so that they can push it back. Right at the beginning, we see a series of deaths. Trojan heroes kill 3 Greek heroes in rapid succession. So when they come back, Paris and Hector have a real influence on the battlefield. So that's what happens in section 1. Hector and Paris join the battle. Athena and Apollo now intervene. Remember, we have 2 gods, and they're kind of on opposite sides. So Athena is more on the sides of the Greek. She wants the Greeks to win. Apollo, a kind of sun god, an archer god, he is on the side more of the Trojans. He's more sympathetic to the Trojans. As they're discussing between Athena and Apollo, here's what Apollo says in the conversation between Athena and Apollo. Then Lord Apollo, son of Zeus, replied, "Let's stir the courage in brave Hector's heart to challenge one among the Greek command to fight with him alone in single combat. The bronze-clad Greeks will marvel at the call." And then what they do is they send an idea to Helenus's keen mind. That is the brother, but he's also an augurer or a seer, a prophet. So he actually can read the signs of the gods, because the gods don't actually sit down and have a conversation with you very often. Sometimes they do in this world. Often they will just plant a seed of an idea in the mind of somebody. And in this case, it's Helenus who tells Hector, "Hector, dear brother, equal to wise Zeus, please listen now to what I have to say. Let all the Trojans and Greeks sit down, and you alone call forth the bravest Greek to fight with you in dreadful single combat. For know that death will not yet come to you, for so I've heard it from the deathless gods." This, of course, makes Hector feel kind of good. Like, okay, so I could do this and I won't die. At least he's being told he won't die by an augurer, a predictor of the future, or a reader of the signs is a better way of thinking about it. So Hector says, okay, now this is really interesting. So you're in a battle, a war, and Hector is going to pause the fighting, and both sides are going to listen. So they're going to listen, and they're going to, enact a duel. Now, this seems ridiculous, but when you hear about, even in modern warfare, that there will be a pause, or they call it a ceasefire, and I won't mention names, but there are wars this is 2025, there are wars that are going on right now where there has been temporary ceasefires, which is maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, where they have some kind of attempt or a real potential negotiation. The negotiation often falls through in this particular case, and then the war starts again. And that's exactly what's happening here. Same kind of thing. So he sits them down, and Hector tells the Greeks, like, "Hey, everybody, let's all calm down and sit down for a second." So you can imagine there's a kind of ridiculousness to it in a sense, but wars often are thought of as ridiculous because they kind of are. So I always picture like this guy's about to stab somebody and he hears them say, "Hey, let's pause." He's like, "Okay, let's pause for a second." And he's like, "All right." And the other guy's like, "Thank goodness. That was a good time out." So Hector then issues a duel to the Greeks. That's the next section. And this is where we will get our word of the day. But first, let me read a critical section here. It's a couple lines, very important, that Hector, and just, I kind of picture again, you have the Greeks over here, they're sitting down. He actually tells them to sit down, and the Trojans sit down, which is a way for, everyone to kind of calm down. Because if you're standing, maybe someone will throw a spear or shoot somebody, and you don't want that happening because then you have the fighting starting again, which happened after the last duel, if you remember. This happens in the chapter called A Truce Shattered. So he doesn't want that, so they all sit down. And here is what Hector says. So he's proposing a duel. "And this I say, and let Zeus be our witness. If he should slay me with his sharpened spear, let him strip off my armor as his prize, but let my body be returned to Troy, that we may honor it with fire and rites. But if I kill him, and Apollo grants to me that victory, I'll take his arms and bring them to the temple in our town, but send his body back unto your ships, that you may give him proper funeral rites, and build for him a tomb upon the shore. And men in days to come will say of him, as they sail by upon the wine-dark sea, Behold, the grave of one who died long since, a mighty warrior slain by Hector's hand. So will they speak, and my renown will live." So notice what's happening here. You have a duel that is proposed to essentially help end the war again. This is another chance to end the war that we had also with Paris and Menelaus that didn't work out. Now, of course, all the audience knows that this is, even in the ancient Greek times when they're listening to Homer, the actual bard thousands of years ago, they all knew this was not going to end the war. But it's still very exhilarating. It's still like, oh my gosh. And it allows, from a narrative standpoint, the focus on two characters and the clash between these two characters and representing many of the deep values that the broader war is bringing to bear. Now, the word of the day, I'm going to put a hard stop here for you to pause and think for a moment. This is one of the most important words of the day we're going to have. There are two critical concepts that you need to understand in order to translate for yourself the deep cultural values that we're reading about in the Iliad, how they're similar to what we have today, and how they're very different than what we have today. Now, the word is the equivalent, the easiest translation is honor, but honor is not really getting at what is happening here. So here's the Greek word. It's pronounced Timē, Timē, Timē. And it's often spelled in the transliterated version like time, T-I-M-E with the mark over it, but it's Timē, Timē. Usually the emphasis is on the may, so it's Timē, Timē. And this can be translated essentially as honor, but also worth and value. Most important to this, that's a huge difference between the way we conceive of honor, which we don't really have clear understanding of honor. We don't have an honor system in the way that they, we don't have like a true honor system in the way they had even 100, 150 years ago, where, for instance, if someone dishonors you, even in America in the 19th century, you might have a president, this actually happened, who will duel somebody else with a pistol and they will kill each other. This is a thing of honor. So if you insult somebody, you are kind of obligated to stand up physically for the spiritual dishonoring that they had, that they gave to you. In the Greek Iliad, and really throughout most of the Greek world, the ancient Greek world, the concept of Timē was represented not just in what people said about you. There's actually a kind of a different concept for what people say about you, although they're interrelated. But it's actually represented in the material prizes of honor. This is critical. Material prizes, things, gold, women, spoils, gifts, awards, swords, lands, and I will stress again, women, slaves, brides. All these things are representative material achievements based on your Timē. So before we go into what Hector is saying here, I want to point out something critical about the whole structure of the Iliad. Achilles abandons the Greek army because his Timē has been fundamentally dishonored. That is when Agamemnon arbitrarily says, I am going to take Briseis, your prize of honor that you earned through the sweat on your brow and through the hard work of your back and through the edge of your sword. So even though your sword is the greatest in all the Greek army, and you're the reason we're winning all these battles, and you rightfully get, after me, Agamemnon, the great king of kings here, you get the best prizes. Because I am who I am, I'm going to take away your prize. So Achilles realizes that this whole Timē system of material winnings is kind of arbitrary. And so he quits. And we're going to get into his discussion and understanding of Timē in a few chapters. But it's very important to understand that what we have here is, in chapter 7, is Homer reaffirming and over again kind of showcasing the cultural values that we have. And notice in the excerpt that I read that Hector says two important critical things in this duel that everyone has to agree to before they get started. This is a duel to the death. Whoever wins will be able to strip the armor of the other person. And we've already seen this numerous times And I'm going to tell you now, we're going to see this many, many times in the future, sometimes very brutally, where you're trying to fight, even if someone on your side dies by, if a Greek warrior dies by a Trojan, then all these Greeks will often try to fight to get the body and the armor back before the Trojans can strip him. That's a big part of this material, this honor, this Timē. In this case, Hector is kind of indicating that, look, whoever wins this, they'll just be able to strip my body, but we're going to send back strip the armor from the body, but we will send the body back. And that is, again, a very important part. Now, the second part of this is once you've stripped the body, the fallen warrior's armor, that is a visible prize of your honor. So whoever wins the battle of Hector kills the Greek that he's going to fight. He will strip the armor, and he will either wear or give as a gift or just hold on to as an indication of his prowess. But another indication of his prowess, or that he'll indicate, is actually that if he kills the Greek, let's say, and he says this in the excerpt I've read, that you go ahead and bury him. We will give you the ability and the time to bury and honor him. And this will actually add to my glory. And we'll talk about glory more later, but this will add to my glory. In other words, this will add to what people will say about me, Hector, the man who slayed and defeated this person. So you have Timē, which is honor, but it's honor represented by spoils or by booty. You can think of like the more honor you have, the more stuff you're given. After you sack a town, who gets the best and most stuff? How do you divvy that up? Whoever has the most honor. That's why it's such a big deal how much honor you get. Now, how do you know how much honor someone gets? Part of that is how much glory they have. This is why it's interrelated. So we're going to cover this more as we go through the whole Iliad. I want to cover how honor has kind of altered and been different through different periods of time. So in the Greek, it really is individual glory and honor for your prowess as a warrior, your prowess as someone who's capable of defeating your enemies, and you bring great glory to yourself. Roman times, this shifts. You see this with other Roman stories where it's not so much about your individual glory and honor. It's really about what you can do for the furtherance of the overall city or nation or empire of Rome. And it's more about you trying to please the system of your fathers. This is represented in the concept pietas, which is where we get piety. And, you're trying to give esteem, public esteem to the various offices or a powerful father figure in your life, including what ended up being emperors. In medieval Christian honor, this is a huge shift in honor. So Christianized chivalry. So the concept of chivalry, you've heard of this. This is more about virtue and service. So this is how Christians have taken the concept of honor, which is about winning prizes for yourself. And now it's more about, in a sense, you could think of this as, in a gamified sense, is like you're trying to win honor points so that you can hopefully look good in a certain sense, but in a more profound Christian sense, that you're doing good deeds in the name of God and the church. So in other words, you have a kind of earthly reputation and heavenly accountability. So the Greeks did not have a heavenly concept in the way that the Christians do, where there's like, a kind of hierarchy to the goods that you do, and the goods are determined by your protection of particularly the weak, but also defending the church. So this becomes a big part of the Crusades, right? Is you want to be a Christian knight or like a Christian knight, go off and defend the church. And because so you would put the church's symbol, this cross, on your shield or somewhere on your person, and you'd go out and you'd fight for the church. And that becomes a big part of what it means to be a knight and to have honor, and even to obeying your king or feudal bonds. A Christian knight of the medieval period would often fight for feudal bonds. There's also a martial prowess, moral conduct, to the whole moral code for how you fight as a knight. Did all knights actually abide by that? No, of course not. But it was the code that you're supposed to try to accomplish. The same thing is they don't fully and accurately, in real life in the ancient Greek time, would they actually do exactly the best way it should. But that's the point of a moral code like this, is to try to hold people accountable and push them into that direction. The concept of honor changes a lot over time. You see in Europe, the duel persisting into the 19th century, the 1800s, where you'd have officers and gentlemen fighting duels to preserve their honor. In America, you have a strong honor culture that is very much about reputation for courage and respectability. Today, honor, I think, is much more diffuse, much more abstract. We kind of have concepts of honor codes and honorary awards, but honor has been maybe internalized, maybe even a little bureaucratized. It's not really about ritual combat. It's more about symbolic recognition. Now, of course, within the military, there's still, family duty honor is a big part of it. And it does, in our films, in our popular fiction, the honor and the single combat warrior is still highly elevated. I'm going to give you a couple quick examples and we'll end here in terms of the Greek word of the day and the Greek concept of the day, I should say. One really interesting one is a book that I like called The Right Stuff by Tom Wolfe. This book is very much about the fighter pilots that became test pilots for the military and for NASA, preceding the advent of jet engines and fighter planes and in planes, and then eventually into rockets. And these became the first astronauts. And the whole concept that Tom Wolfe talks about, and that you can see right at the advent of World War I, when you have planes actually acting out in kind of a fighting scenario, especially aerial combat, is you do have remaining in that space the old school knights and the single combat. And we have that image. Like, there's a movie that came out just I think a year or two ago, Top Gun Maverick. And that's the whole kind of concept, is that he's kind of like a knight in shining armor, except instead of shining armor, he's a knight in a big jet propulsion plane that has, highly advanced technology. But he's a single combat person. Essentially, it's him versus the enemy. And that's what we have going on here. And you have that we have that view and admiration for that in America to this day. But it's not really realistic in most of the military conflicts. Most military throughout all of history is not really one-on-one combat. I mean, that happens occasionally, but it's not that. It is more and more about force of arms and resources from one major nation against some other nation. So that is your Greek word of the day. So Hector puts forth that proposition, let's fight each other, but we'll do so under the guidelines of Timē. And if you remember a concept we talked about in a former chapter discussion, eidos, which is about shame. So that's what he talks about. Well, we're going to bring back the bodies. You can bring them back and make sure you honor the body. We're not going to shame the body by mutilating it. That is a horrible thing. So he says, I'm going to strip the armor of whoever I kill, but you can have the body back and give it proper rituals. The next section is Ajax draws the lot. Now, what has happened after Hector gives this proposition is something very interesting, is you have a series of examples or Homer showing us in various ways the playing out of Timē and eidos. So Hector gives the announcement. Menelaus, of course, automatically steps up and says, I would be too ashamed, too filled with eidos, if I don't do this. But Agamemnon, his brother, the Greek, says, wait a second, you're going to get messed up. So he says to him, basically, I see your honor, you're very brave, you're wonderful, but let's have someone else take on this. That is a really interesting moment of showing the pragmatic side of war in this honor-bound system, because Agamemnon recognizes that Menelaus has no chance against Hector. So I think of this in modern boxing terms, if you know someone like Mike Tyson in his prime. So imagine being a 19, 20-year-old amateur boxer who's pretty decent, and but you're put up against prime Mike Tyson, and you're going to get demolished, and he knows, but because maybe he insulted your mother, you have to go and do this, but you're going to lose. And that's kind of what Agamemnon's doing. Nestor, the old man, stands up, and this is in the section Ajax draws the lot. Before Ajax draws that lot, Nestor, the old man of Greece, stands up and tells some stories, as he always does. Here's a section of one of these stories that he talks about. There's a lot of names in here, but the point is he's trying to inspire the Greeks to somebody answer Hector's call. "O Father Zeus, Athena and Apollo, if only I were young and strong once more, as when we fought beside swift Celadon, the Pylians and bold Arcadian spears, near Phaia's walls and by Iardion's stream. Their champion, Eurythalion, stood forth, a godlike warrior clad in shining arms, that once belonged to mighty Arethios, whom men and fair-haired women called macemen. Because he fought not with a bow or spear, but broke the enemy's ranks with iron club. But cunning Lycurgus laid him low, not by sheer strength, but with a clever plan, within a narrow path where his great mace could not protect him as it did before." And Nestor continues with his story about this battle between these two single combat warriors. What I think is very significant here is, as always, Homer is showing us this concept played out in a variety of ways and how it operates within the souls, the moral actions of the individuals. So Nestor is an old man who's too old to do the fight. So he's saying, I'm going to inspire the young men to fight. Well, how does he do it? By giving them an example, a story of how someone in his youth fought off another person and won great, even someone more powerful than them, and won great honor and glory for themselves. So within the structure of the Iliad, we have a story within a story that's teaching us and the Greek warriors at that time. It's showing them the whole value system of the honor, the Timē system, which is, look, whoever goes and fights Hector today is, if you win, you could be spoken about by some old man in 50 years from now. And then they'll tell some story in 100 years, and some Homer, some bard will pick up that story. Homer's teaching people along the way how to understand this system. Okay, so the story continues in Homer, chapter 7. Ajax, several Greeks say, okay, I will do it. They are inspired. They draw a lot, so they kind of draw to see who will win, and Ajax draws the lot. Then they stand up, Ajax and Hector, and they face off. Ajax says to Hector, "Hector, today you'll know what kind of men the Greeks have brought, even without Achilles. Though he remains beside our ship in rage, we stand prepared to fight and take you down. Now ready yourself. Show what you can do. Let's see if you survive this mighty war." So notice something really important. Homer wants to remind you that this is really Achilles' song. This is the song of Achilles. This is the story of Achilles. So right now, Achilles is so respected, so honored, that the greatest of the warriors in Greece at the moment, after Achilles, is speaking to Hector about Achilles' honor. And he's saying, look, even without him, we're still honorable. But it's kind of implying something about the grandiosity of Achilles, that he is head and shoulders above everybody else. Now they battle back and forth. They battle with spears. Here's toward the end of the battle. So you'll have to get the book if you want to read more of this with me. Then Ajax found a much larger rock in turn. He spun and hurled it with a mighty roar. It struck the middle part of Hector's shield and brought him crashing down onto his knee. There on his back he sprawled beneath his shield, but soon Apollo raised him from the ground. So he's knocked back. Apollo kind of helps him up, and he gets back up. Then they pull out swords, and then they're stopped. And that happens in the next section, which is the duel ends in Truce. So they've been battling for a while, and they're equal. So two heralds, one for the Trojans, one from the Greeks, step forward and represent their side and say, we've seen enough. You have equally shown your Timē. You're both honorable men, meaning strong prowess in terms of honor. Like you're both competent, both capable. That's another part of what they mean by honor. So now they're going to become friends. What? So they just try to kill each other. And now Hector is going to have a kind of guest friendship exchange of gifts. Here's a few lines from that. Then Hector, great of helm, responded fast. Ajax, the gods have granted you such strength, and you are supreme in battle with the Greeks. Yes, let us stop our fighting for today. Tomorrow we can start this war again until the gods decide who wins the fight. So understand that the warrior ethos in most cultures of war that have a warrior ethos, a warrior culture, that it really is good for you to not only acknowledge, but to amplify the prowess, the competence, the strength, the abilities of your opponent. Why? Because it elevates you. So if I beat Mike Tyson at his prime, that's pretty cool for me. If Mike Tyson is, 6-year-old Mike Tyson and I'm 40-year-old Kirk and I punch a 6-year-old in the face, like, it's not very good, right? It's not, what does that say about me and my prowess and my abilities as a boxer? Nothing. It means I'm weak. And it's the same kind of thing here. Like the more strong the other side, and then if you defeat them, the better. And then if you don't defeat them, still you look pretty good as a, dead guy in the sense of, well, if I'm going to die, at least I get killed by the greatest of all the warriors of Troy. And then at the end of Hector's speech, he says, but first let us exchange fair gifts of peace. Not permanent peace, just temporary peace. He goes on, that all may know we fought with hearts of steel, yet still respect and friendship bind us both. Such an odd thing to talk about. This guest friendship is what this is called. We'll talk about this later. The next section is a night of mourning and respect. So both Greeks and Trojans gather and burn their dead in solemn ceremonies, honoring the fallen within temporary peace. And that's what you have going on. You have Nestor speaking up, you have Agamemnon talking, and they're reflecting on what's happened and preparing and debating what they should do next. And the Trojans are doing the same. So we kind of get a look from Homer on both sides. The last section of chapter 7 is the Greeks build defenses. And here, this is a very important thing. I do have to say that the building of a wall has traditionally, and I still think today, means that you are in a weakened state. And I think that's what's happening here is the Greeks are starting to recognize the tide is turning. And in fact, the next chapter is called The Tide of Battle Turns. But they are starting to recognize that the gods don't just have their backs. They're not going to just, like Diomedes, just roll over the Trojan army and go to Troy and conquer it, especially without Achilles. It doesn't seem to be happening. They're met by equality. There's a duel, and it's an equal to fight, and that's the two greatest warriors. So that's an indication that, okay, we're at a stalemate. We're equal. And, now we're worried that there's a chance that the tides are going to turn. And so what they do is they build some walls to protect their ships. And the last thing I'll say on this is one of the reasons they need to protect their ships is because if the Trojans are able to burn their ships, then the Greeks are all going to be slaughtered. So that is always a threat that they have to deal with because, again, they have nowhere to go. They have sailed there. The Trojans have allies. They have Troy. They have the walls of Troy. They could even move to other tribes and other cities around Troy if they absolutely needed to for protection. The Greeks have none of that. The Greeks are the attackers. So they are there. The only protection they have is all the ramparts and ships they have. So they're going to tonight build some walls to protect themselves. So that is chapter 7 of the Iliad, or book 7. I hope you'll check it out. Make sure to please go and get the book, the Iliad. You can get any translation you want because this will match up with that. My translation will match up with any other translation because they're all translations of the same source text. But my translation is the best for first-time readers who really want to have a first great experience with the Iliad. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.